Brad, how are you?
Very good.
Can I call you Brad?
You sure can.
Okay, Dr. Allen. Give me. I'm not intimidated by you, but you may mention her. I'm intimidated by your wife.
Maybe. That could be. I will say one thing, because I don't know the whole geographic of your audience. I think some of the things we're going to talk about, I hope we're going to talk about, are going to affect everybody if they live in this country.
Yeah, I know. As a matter of fact, in that early introduction, I say that I've had people, when I did some call-ins, call from Europe, from Pennsylvania. It's seen worldwide, and what you talk about has implications really worldwide, but to all of the United States.
Right.
Give us a brief biography.
Well, a brief biography is I spent my life as a pediatric heart surgeon. I did that for about 40 years. I worked at major universities, UCLA, USC, University of Illinois, and University of Texas, where I ran the surgical program.
So we're just cutting people.
Well,
you ran departments.
I ran departments, and it was, even though I did some adults, most of my life I was a pediatric heart surgeon. I did surgery on children that were born with heart defects. I'm also a medical researcher. I did that all those years. I published over 100 papers and book chapters. My research is very innovative, and I was inducted into the Medical Honor Society. I've won
a lot of peer review.
Yeah, I've won a lot of research and teaching awards, and been invited all over the world, Asia, Europe, South America, and the United States, obviously, to give lectures on what my research entailed. Along the way, I've built whole departments or whole divisions and ECMO programs and nursing units and ICUs. And so I like to think that I've learned how to work with people to bring complex ideas to completion.
Yeah, that's something I noticed. You're a fine pediatric surgeon, but you also are a renowned researcher, and you have been a great administrator from scratch, building departments.
Yeah, I have built several research labs. I built a division from scratch. So you learn how to do that, how to work with people, and how to be an administrator. Not my favorite thing to do. And so the other thing is that my wife and I, one thing I'll never regret being a heart surgeon about is I met my wife when I operated on her dad when I was still doing adult heart surgery. My wife and I started a skincare company.
What's her name?
My wife, I'm married to a woman named Jacqueline Smith, who was, for those of you that were old enough to remember Charlie's Angels, she was one of the original Charlie's Angels.
And 20 feature films on TV. And
she was the queen of the miniseries, they called her for a while. And I met her when I operated on her dad, and we've been together about 33 years. And she's still a down-home Texas girl. She used to call her mother 3 or 4 times a day. She never lost those values, which is why we've been together 33 years and why I am married.
I kind of cut you off. You talked about building a business.
Well, we built a skincare company, and that's allowed me to have a little bit more insight into what businesses go through and and all the problems that they experience, especially over COVID and with the government regulations, and how to fix them, and how what government does not just affects medicine, but affects business.
Now, besides the skincare line, didn't she create a clothing line?
Oh, my wife, if we're talking about her, she was the first person to really do celebrity marketing. She started with Kmart in 1985. She was really the original one that did this. She's always done things that she believed in. She was part of Kmart for 36 years. Only with what happened with bankruptcy with Sears did she leave. She's now starting another clothing line because she's very well known for that. She's got she loved home decorating and home interior design. So
you guys have had a successful business that you were a part of.
She's got several. Yeah, she's also does a fabric line for fabric cut for the home interior. She does a wig line. which she uses to help women that, especially women right now. She's doing something for women who've maybe lost their hair from cancer, because she's very aware of that.
We all have seen and know people who've gone through that and lost their hair, mainly women, but also men, and it's a terrible process to go through. Now, I was talking to you about a couple of new pieces of legislation and the damage they are doing.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things is you start to understand how professional politicians always crow and tell you how great they're making your life, and then when you start to look at the details, you realize they're doing just the opposite. And it's something you couldn't do in private practice, or when I used to build programs, you couldn't do that. If you did that, you'd be fired pretty quickly. Politicians don't seem to have a problem with it. And there's numerous examples. I mean, just about every bill they pass, they never look at the consequences of what they do. They don't even look if they're solving the problem.
So they don't pay any attention to the
seems like
the most important law in life, the life of unintended consequences.
It doesn't seem like they do. And the law we're talking about is the Inflation Reduction Act, which we already know it doesn't solve or get rid of inflation. We already know the problems that come with the 87,000 new IRS agents, which I like to tell people when they say, well, they're only going to tax people that wealthy, that make a lot. Then I would always ask them, well, then why did every Democrat vote down an amendment that said if you make less than $400,000 a year, we won't, this bill won't affect you? But they voted the amendment down because they know better. Well,
the Democrats voted.
The Democrats, yeah.
Salud.
Yeah, my opponent, Salud Carbajal, absolutely. People know about that a little bit. They know a little bit about climate change, because the Democrats and Salud and everybody have moved on from the Inflation Reduction Act of being about inflation, because too many people know it's not going to do that. They named it that, thinking the public wouldn't get it, but too many people know, to climate change, which we also know it won't do anything to climate change. Even if it's completely effective, it'll change the temperature by 0.0009 degrees Fahrenheit. As a doctor, that would be like me taking your temperature down from 104 to 103.9991 degrees. Nothing. But the place where they really are now talking about, which I understand as a doctor, is the healthcare part of it. What they've done to prescription drugs by letting Medicare dictate prices. That's price controls. And we know from history, anytime you put in price controls, they have unintended consequences. They usually don't work, and they result in less of something.
Yeah.
So they're running around saying how you're going to pay less for drugs. However, let's look at what else it's going to do, because there was a study, an analysis out of the University of Chicago by an economist, Thomas Phillipson. He showed that this reduction is going to cause, this price controls are going to cause about $663 billion less in R&D. The drug companies won't have the money to look at new drugs, meaning 135 less new medications over the next 15 to 17 years, and it'll take longer for those drugs to come to market. He said a delay of maybe 7 years, even those that do come. That will mean a loss of 330 million life years. That is 30 times the amount of lost life years from COVID. So in other words, oh, and by the way, he said it's going to cost more money for medical services, for your health care, because you're not going to have the newer medicines to help you. So you're going to suffer more because you won't have the new medicines. You're going to die sooner, more lost life years, and you're going to pay more for that privilege.
And hurt all the way physically.
Yeah, and there was another study. You would think that, okay, they didn't know about Phillipson. But there was a study in 2005 that looked at the same thing, only at a different time period, 1991 to 2000, showed the exact same thing. They showed that that the loss would be up to $28 trillion more in healthcare costs, and almost 200 medicines that wouldn't be developed. So once again, this has been, several studies have shown it. And for those people who don't believe it's going to happen, all we have to do is look at Europe. Europe put in price controls in the late 80s, early 90s. What happened? Europe used to lead the US in drug development. Now, only 3% of late-stage drug funding is in Europe compared to the US. The 80% of the drugs that are now in the pipeline are coming from the US. So Europe fell apart with that, with their price controls. So there's a huge unintended or consequence to this. And I think you might say, well, I want my drugs to be less expensive. Yes, but do you want to die sooner? Do you want to suffer more? And do you want to pay more for your overall health care? The sad thing is, it doesn't even solve any of the problems on why drugs are expensive. And there are ways we could have done that without price controls and without the negative consequences.
Give us some. Give us some ways that we could lower drug prices.
Sure. Generic drugs have gone down in price over the last 10 years by almost 40%.
Wow.
But there are a lot of government regulations or problems that government could solve with bringing generics out to market. And they could look at that. They could look at easier ways to bring generics. They could allow drugs that are off a patent that are approved by the FDA from even other countries to be allowed to come into the United States if a drug company here doesn't want to make the generic to it. We can also, new drugs are very expensive to make. The cost, because of a lot of it from, once again, government regulations, the things that Congress and the FDA put in the way, has gone from about 800,000 in 2003 to 2.6 billion in 2018, and the chance of approval has gone from almost 1 in 4 down to about 1 in 10. So it's more expensive, 4 times more expensive to bring the drug to market, and you got about half the chance that the drug will even be approved if you bring it.
You told me something that shocked me. You know that I have a chronic leg pain, maybe arthritis or something, but 2 Advil takes care of it. And you told me that Advil once was a prescription drug.
Yeah, we can, going back to what I was saying, we can bring down the cost of even new drugs in a lot of ways also, that without price controls. And that would bring down the cost of this drug. But there are a myriad of other ways. For instance, there's a lot of drugs that are off prescription in other countries. There's no reason that, just like Advil, Zantac, Benadryl used to all be prescription drugs. Now they're not. You know what? They're a lot less cheap. They're a lot less expensive now. You get competition. You take them off where you don't need a pharmacy, which means you don't need a middle manager to do this. We can eliminate middle managers. There's a lot of other ways of doing it besides price controls. But this is typical of what career politicians do. They don't solve the underlying problem, which is high drug costs because of regulations and because of government intervention. They don't look at how they solve the problem. What they do instead is they put in another new regulation that has a whole bunch of unintended consequences. And so 5 years from now, when your healthcare costs are going up, or you're not living as long and the longevity is going down, they'll just blame somebody else or say it's due to some other reason, and they'll just keep on their merry way. You know, it's like another example is of how they work is this $1 trillion bailout of student loans. What's the problem? You know, as a doctor, I've always learned to address a problem by what's the problem? How do we solve the problem? The analogy I always use is if you have a broken arm and you come to me, I do an exam, figure out you have a broken arm, I fix your broken arm. That's your problem. If you go to a politician, they just say, oh, you have pain. Your main problem is pain. And so they just keep giving you pain pills. They just keep throwing money at it, or they keep throwing regulations at it. That's their equivalent. They don't solve the problem. So the problem with college tuition is the tuition is too high, and we have students taking courses that don't get them a good job when they finish. So what does the government do? They decide, well, let's throw more money at it, $1 trillion. Well, what do colleges do? They up their cost of their tuition more, because why not? So they not only
higher paid administrators, higher paid professors.
no, they don't. It not only does it not solve the problem, but once again, unintended consequences. You put $1 trillion out into the economy, you've now just made inflation worse. Worse than that, though, and it does get a lot worse because people know about the unfairness. But not only have you not solved the problem, not only have you made inflation worse, you've added a huge amount of money to the debt. People don't understand the debt, but the debt is like a government credit card. It is like a Visa or a MasterCard in your house. And right now that debt is $31 trillion. Well, think of it this way. That's about 10 times what we take in taxes. So if you had a credit card in your house and you made $300,000 a year, you got a good job. But you have a MasterCard that's got $3 million on it. You aren't going to be too happy, and you're not going to go out and spend more money. These guys don't have any problems with it. And here's the other thing. I read this the other day. The interest on the debt this year, because of the fact that the Fed is raising rates, remember, you got to pay off the debt on your credit card every month, is projected to be over $700 billion. That's more than our national defense budget. So the debt on our credit card is going up, up, up. And so what are they going to end up doing? Printing more money, adding more to the debt in order to pay off the credit card. At some point in time,
you're borrowing money to pay your debt.
Right. So at some point in time, this is going to come back. And what's interesting is that especially the young people, a lot of them are supportive of our Democratic colleagues. They don't realize that by spending all this money that they're doing, what they're doing is actually mortgaging, putting more money on the credit card. They're the ones that are going to have, when they get out and they get a job, they're the ones that are going to pay it off, because it's like, as I said, that credit card at your house. If it's $3 million and your father and your mother and people retire, you're going to be left with that debt.
Well, the answer personally to debt and business to debt is bankruptcy. Now there's two entities that don't seem to be going bankrupt. One by legislation, and there's some talk of changing, and that is the students who have all this debt. It's the only debt that I know of that can't be bankrupt. They can go bankrupt for their credit cards, but they cannot bankrupt their debt. And of course, the other one is government can't bankrupt. Right. I guess it can.
As I said, though,
collapse.
The problem is high college tuition. You don't solve it by this. There are ways, once again, of going after the high college tuition, and there are a number of proposals we could talk about. But it's typical of the politicians. They when you get around an election, they think if they throw a lot of money at an issue, they can go around and get more votes.
Now,
not worry about the consequences.
You were talking about legislation that has in it some of these provisions. Mm-hmm. What's the name of that legislation?
Which one? The Inflation Reduction Act?
Yeah.
Yes.
And of course, that was a party line vote, and our Democrat. What's his name?
It's Salud Carvajal.
Oh, that guy.
Well, the other thing about it is, which is interesting.
Well, Salud brings a lot of money home.
All right. So yeah, that's there's two parts to that part. But I wanted to finish. The Inflation Reduction Act. Think about it. It doesn't solve inflation. Then they went on to climate change. It doesn't do that, and it's going to make your health care worse. But yet they're out there telling you how great the bill is. And this is what career politicians do over and over and over again. And they count on the public being too naive to know that the consequences of the bill are actually going to cause a problem. As far as you asked me about Salud brings home a lot of money. Two problems with that. The first is, I know this district, I don't know the numbers exactly, but I know this district sends well over $1 billion a year to the federal government. Salud brings back a few $1 million a year in park funds or
I want to keep it here and spend it.
I think we'd be better off just keeping our $1 billion here and even half of it. Even if we got half of it back, we'd be better. If, we didn't send half of it. The other thing is, though, once again, this is their typical way of doing it. They just keep they think taxing and spending and telling you they're bringing something back is good. I'm telling you, they keep putting it on the credit card. Last year they spent $7 trillion, but took in just around $4 trillion in taxes. They just put $3 trillion on the credit card, just last year alone. Now they're going to put another $1 trillion on with the student loan bailout. At some point in time, that credit card is just going to explode, and the people it's going to explode on, as I say, are going to be the young people. And if they don't wake up when they suddenly get out and get a job, they're talking now about raising payroll taxes. It's not going to affect me. I'm older, but I paid my payroll taxes. But it's going to affect those young people. They're going to do it. And if they keep thinking it's the rich, as I said, then why did every Democrat vote down the 87,000 IRS agents couldn't go after somebody making less than $400,000? If you look at tax records and you look at who's paid over the years, it has not been the rich. It has been the middle class, because that's where the money is. And these students, they're going to have a lot of hidden taxes, I say, in payroll taxes. They're going to be paying for everybody that's on Social Security because it's going broke. And how are they going to solve Social Security? The students, the young kids, are going to have to pay more. So they don't even realize that their future is being mortgaged because at the moment all the politicians care about is, once again, their job, their power, and they figure if they give away money by the time it all comes due, they won't be in office anymore.
Medicare is running toward a deadline where it can't pay its bills in the next, I think, 5 years. The only answer is to raise taxes on the working people.
Well, no, there are a lot of fixes. Look, healthcare. Obama. Look at what Obamacare did. It doubled our premiums. You couldn't keep your doctor if they said you could. I'm not saying our health care can't be improved, because it can. I mean, I'm a doctor. I know a lot of different ways. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal back in 2014 and predicted all of these things. And I've written another op-ed years ago with some of the fixes we could do to health care. There are ways of fixing it, but let me put it to you this way. Our Secretary of Health and Human Services right now is a gentleman by the name of Becerra, who came from California. He was the Secretary of State. He's never worked in healthcare.
He was Secretary of State here.
He's never worked in healthcare in his life. Yet he's running the agency that decides how we're going to make these things fix. When I was running a department, or I was running a division, or if I was running a hospital, I'd at least bring somebody in who had some healthcare experience, that at least has worked in the field a little bit and understands it. It seems with government, that's not what's important. What's important is political payback. Hey, you helped me get elected, or you're going to help me. Let me give you a cushy job. I mean, how could you give somebody to run healthcare and not have somebody who has ever worked in it before? It's amazing. And I know the Wall Street Journal did a piece years ago. A few months ago, about how I think over 60 of the appointments by Biden's administration have never been in the private sector, and yet they're controlling the private sector. I love these guys when they say, "I feel your pain. I understand what you're going through." They've worked in government all their life. They
gave me the pain.
They don't have any idea. I mean, as I said, when you talked to me about, we talked about small businesses, I couldn't believe the amount of regulations when I was setting this up. It's unbelievable, the roadblocks government puts in the way of businesses, and I don't think they even realize they're doing it.
We're going to go to a document that you've prepared. It's on your website, but we're going to go through it piece by piece.
Fine.
And I think our fine director, Mike Nicholson, has some clips that he'll want to play at the beginning and during this. And so that's your cue, Mike.
News Channel reporter Patricia Martellotti spoke with Republican candidate Brad Allen.
And so when I looked at this many problems, I thought I can either keep sitting on the sidelines and do nothing, or finally get back and get involved and try to change how we're dealing with these multiple issues.
Dr. Brad Allen served as a pediatric heart surgeon at multiple institutions.
I've written nearly 100 papers, multiple book chapters. I have lectured both in Asia, Europe, and the United States, all over. And I ran a department of pediatric cardiac surgery at the University of Texas.
While Allen says most of his accomplishments have been in medicine, he wants to bring his problem-solving skills to politics.
And in research, which is partly what I want to bring, you learn how, and in medicine, you learn how to look at a problem and then decide how do you solve it. And I think that's what's needed more in this country.
Some of Allen's top priorities include combating crime and inflation.
If I had to pick two right off the bat, I'd say inflation. It's killing small businesses. It's killing people. Even if they're getting higher wages, they can't. The average family can't make ends meet. And the other would be crime, and because one of the biggest roles of government is to keep people safe on the streets, and I think they're failing in that right now.
If elected, Allen says more money and regulations won't solve a problem.
As a doctor, I don't do that. If you come to me with a problem or a complaint, I look at your problem and then I look at how can we solve that problem, and I have to look at the consequences of the solutions each time. So you can't just have a one-size-fits-all for all those problems. Each one is separate. And that's the problem with what goes on in Washington. They don't look at it this way. But I bring a different mindset. I'm not the politician. I'm a problem solver. You got to then wake up and say, okay, if that's the case, if I've had enough, I'm going to change. And maybe put somebody there that's just not another career politician so we don't keep doing the same thing.
In Santa Barbara, I'm News Channel reporter Patricia Martellotti.
Mike, we're going into the contract to restore California, and I think you have a clip of the original announcement at the courthouse.
I'm Dr. Brad Allen. I'm running for Congress. I'm introducing my contract to restore California, to restore sanity to our state, which is completely out of control with professional politicians. You can read the details on my website at drbradalan.com/contract. And that's drbradallen.com/contract. You can find all the details there on how we're going to bring sanity back to California.
And I might as well get it out of the way. I think you have Brad's most recent TV commercial.
With all our nation's problems, isn't it time to send people with real-life experience to Washington instead of more politicians? As a pediatric heart surgeon, I've spent my life finding solutions to complex problems to help people live better lives. As a small business owner, I understand the problems businesses face each day and what is needed to create jobs and heal our economy. I'm Dr. Brad Allen, and I approve this message. I will bring real-life experience and leadership to Washington, not political talking points.
So let's go through this step
Okay.
by step. I'm going to have something they never see. I'm going to have to put glasses on.
I'm joining you.
Item one is about, I think, the most concerning thing for all voters today. Tell us about item one.
Well, let me just also introduce what this is. The reason I came up with this contract is that I wanted people to know where I stood. Too many people are uninformed, and so I wanted to put out a commitment that clearly stated my positions, no fine print. It was also about trying to also maybe get other people to sign on, but it was really about bringing people with real life solutions and real life experience to this. Not, once again, a lot of politicians signing on. This is about, I think we have enough of that. We have enough people that have grown up in government. I wanted people like myself that have a lot of experience in business and healthcare to do this. But then what I did is, as you said, I wanted to give you my positions with no fine print. Number one is tame inflation by restoring fiscal responsibility. 64% of people right today are living paycheck to paycheck. This is crazy. And as I already told you, Congress keeps spending money as though it's going out of style. I think we need to bring fiscal responsibility back to Congress. They need to live within a certain budget just like everybody else does in their house. They just feel like the national credit card is somebody else's problem, not theirs. And so that the first thing is to do that. I believe we need to cut the national credit, cut the cut the credit card. It's got just like you would in your house when you've overspent.
Try to balance a budget.
Stop putting it there. I don't remember how many states, but most states in this country live on a balanced budget, and families have to do that too. You can't just keep putting money on this. We've gotten out of hand. The debt has gotten to be more than our military spending, and I think it's more than our military spending and Social Security spending combined. We got to bring that down. So, and the only way to do that is to stop just taxing and spending. As I said, the politicians love to just tell you how much money they brought back to the district as though there's no consequence and no downside to bringing money back. There is.
Now, how about another big issue in our area with closures and regulations and taxes? How about small businesses?
Well, that's probably point number 2, reduce regulations to let businesses prosper. And as I said, I have personal experience with this. But people don't realize the first year of this administration with this Democratic Congress, they put in more regulations and more paperwork requirements, 130 million new hours of paperwork requirements. In their first year, they beat the previous 2 administrations by wide margins. Well, what do you think that does to businesses? Now they can't hire as many people. They have more restrictions on them. When you drive business costs up, that also causes inflation. By the way, that also causes a lot of our supply chain issues that we all know about that also caused inflation. Businesses are overregulated, especially in this state. And so we need to start reducing those in order to allow businesses to flourish, get rid of and redo our supply chains, restore them, and let them start, prospering a little bit more without being so much under the government's thumb.
Well, another big issue now is crime, violence.
Yeah, and we need to support. We need to support our police, not defund them. It's interesting right now. The Democrats say they're not defunding them, but there are 2 bills currently sitting in Congress to fund more police officers and better training for them. They're being held up by our Speaker of the House and her Democratic colleagues. So if they don't want to,
you mean Nancy and
Pelosi
Salud?
And Salud,
they vote right together.
Yeah, the thing is that it's interesting. The politicians in California don't even represent their district anymore. If they did, the Central Coast, which is where Santa Barbara is and Santa Maria, is a little different than San Francisco. So you would think Salud would have some votes that were different from Nancy Pelosi, but he didn't. He just keeps voting with his party. It's not about you in the district. It's about his party so that he can get a better committee assignment, so that he can get a better job and do what he wants to do. It's not about, that's what's one of the things that's so frustrating to me. It's not about you. It's about him. And they're holding up those bills. That's defunding people. We have a real problem with this cashless bail. That just puts criminals right back on the streets.
Even murderers.
I know. Judges need to have some discretion. So I'd be against Bernie Sanders' bill to make that national and make it nationwide. We need to put in maybe a federal statute for people that attack police officers. They're being attacked for violence because there's no fear, and that's got to stop. We need to support our law enforcement because one of the primary roles of government is to keep people safe, and we can't do that if we're defunding or don't have enough funding for our police and we're not protecting them.
We're in the middle, as we saw in Virginia, and it's sweeping the country. We call it a parents' revolt. Talk about education.
Yeah, I mean, look at California. We're, I think, 50th in reading. Half the kids in the state can't read at level. The last set of scores in math, the average score for 8th graders was at 5th grade levels. We're failing our kids badly.
I've never heard Salute mention education.
That's probably because it's doing so poorly. And yet, it seems like when they do mention it these days, they're more concerned about teaching critical race theory or gender identity and telling parents they shouldn't be part of their kids' education. That may be one thing if we were first in reading and first in math, but we're near the bottom. And by the way, we pay more taxes for this education than anywhere else in the country, and our teachers are some of the highest paid. And yet, as we've talked about, Salute and the Democrats think we just need to give more money to the schools. They've been giving money as I said, we're one of the highest paid teachers, one of the highest rates, and we have one of the highest taxes, and yet we're one of the worst schools. So it's about more than money.
Between the various jurisdictions, local, state, and federal, I've heard that the money for the schools is $18,000 a student.
It's hugely high, and I think the answer is that we need to do something different. Number one, parents should have the right to be a part of their kids' education. Two, we need to give parents school choice, because if you had $18,000 per student and you could shop that around because you know what's best for your child, boy, competition does wonderful things. So if we had more school choice with more charter schools, more scholarship tax credits, some more public school open enrollment, and let the money follow the children, I think things would improve. But we got to do something different. The answer can't be just more money, because more money is not working.
Well, I've noticed, I don't want to keep attacking Salud. You're too polite sometimes, but I've noticed that his biggest contributors are the teachers' unions.
Well, that's the thing. We got to put kids first. I can't remember who it was years ago said, when the kids start paying dues, then I'll start paying attention to the kid. It was one of the previous presidents of the teachers union. Let's look at, we'll get to this maybe with COVID, but let's look at what happened with the restrictions. I knew 2 years ago that we should have the schools left open. In Sweden, they did that. And yet they had no problems. A lot of Europe did that. We were one of the last places to open up our schools because the teachers' unions were meeting with the CDC. You could predict the problems that were going to happen. Brown University did a study that showed these kids are going to have a lower IQ and all sorts of social problems. We already know about the higher rates of suicide, self-harm, depression. This has devastated our kids. We did this way, way too long. Once again, to appease teachers' unions, because the teachers were saying, well, we don't want to catch COVID. There were multiple studies that showed schools were not super spreaders, that the teachers actually got there were some that showed they had a higher rate of getting COVID away from schools because they were too busy going on vacations and going places. So to do that to our kids was unconscionable, and we really need to make sure that we now put the kids first, not the teachers' unions.
When Santa Barbara Unified reopened the schools, I believe in the first month there were 23 cases of COVID, and just what you said, they all were brought to the school by teachers and children, not contracted at
they
school.
They were not super spreaders. They weren't doing this. Kids did fine, and what we did, and you knew what the side effects of this were going to be. You could predict it. I mean, you look at what happened, and maybe I'll wait till we get to COVID, and I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of what happened during that. I think that's the next one, actually. No, it's not.
We'll get there.
Okay.
I've got a cheat sheet.
Okay.
Our president was so delighted when his cost of our gas and diesel went down from its high a few months ago, and in 4 or 5 weeks dropped from being $2 a gallon over when he came into office down to being $1.50 a gallon over when he came into office. In the last 3 weeks, it's now spiked up further than it ever has, and every person out there knows that if they drive a car or drive a truck. So how do you answer the energy problem?
It's not just gasoline. It's our whole energy costs have gone up, along with food up 30%. Rents are there. Gas has doubled in price, and that affects the cost of everything. And it adds to
with energy.
It adds to the
how
first
you
one.
Answer
It adds to the first one of inflation. Well, first of all, one of the things about energy is that we need to stop being beholden to one group or one ideology, especially, as I'm a doctor. And so I tend to look at things analytically, and I tend to look at the overall picture. And here's the fallacy. We think that when we do something here, it affects us and not anyone else. When you move carbon from California or the Central Coast to Germany, you're still polluting the planet. So when we stop doing things like drilling for natural gas, which has brought down our emissions by more than 30% in the last few years, and we move to Germany now having to open up several new coal plants in order to supply enough energy because they don't have natural gas, we are not helping the planet. Renewables are great, but we're not ready to institute renewables. And we also have downsides to renewables. You got to mine them. They use children labor in a lot of countries to do these things. We don't have the technology. You got to get rid of the old solar panels and everything else. So it's not a zero-sum game. It's not a free ride. So my solution to this is that we need to invest in all forms. We need to invest in some fossil fuels. We need to invest in nuclear. We need to invest in renewables like wind and solar. And we need to solve the underlying problems that are there. We can't flip a switch. I use this analogy. And as I said, moving carbon from one place to another doesn't help us.
Doesn't help the world.
So when China and India are building hundreds of new coal plants in order to supply energy for all the jobs we're shipping over there and to make all the renewables that we're sending over there, we're going to make the planet worse. There's an interesting statistic. If the United States, the entire country, not just California, but the entire country went carbon net zero today, for the rest of the century, for 80 more years, 78 more years.
No more gas cars, no more...
We went carbon net neutral tomorrow, which we don't have the capability of doing, which would cost trillions upon trillions of dollars. We would change the temperature of the planet by 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit in 80 years. As once again, that's like changing your temperature from 104 to 103.7. It would not make a difference. And as I said, you're going to make it worse as China and India build hundreds of coal plants. We've got to find other ways, and that includes investing in different energy sources, which includes nuclear, which includes natural gas, which is clean.
Let's talk about nuclear.
Okay.
We have the last nuclear power plant in your district. Your opponent has been quiet about what should happen with it over the years. He has played mealy-mouth on closing it, and now even the governor has extended its life by 5 to 10 years because it produces 10% of the energy. And it produces alone, that little nuclear power plant produces more energy than all of solar or wind.
Well, here's the interesting thing about that, and this gets back to how you would solve the energy cost. Everybody looks at Diablo Canyon, the nuclear power plant, as electricity. That's all it is. It's electricity, but it's not. As you said, it supplies 9 to 10% of the state, but it's more than electricity. But just looking at electricity, if you kept it open to 2050, which Salud is not for, he said, well, for a few years. But if you kept it open to 2050, a study out of MIT and Stanford showed that, number one, you would save $21 billion in energy costs. So that's a lot less jobs being shipped overseas for coal plants. Number two, you would save 90,000 acres of land that you would otherwise have to use for windmills and solar and the rest of the things. So you're actually helping the environment, but of course nobody wants to talk about that. It's still nuclear. And so not only do you save in costs, but you save in land, and it's environmentally safe. And everybody says, well, there's nuclear waste. Yeah, but what about the waste of the solar panels? Where now solar panels wear out after 20, 25 years.
And we've learned how to control nuclear waste. It won't go away, but we aren't shipping it around the country anymore.
Nuclear waste is small. Solar panels are big. But more than that, Diablo Canyon is more than electricity. It's been shown that if you put a desalination plant there, it would be much less expensive because the power's there, the water pipes are there. Environmentally, it's not really going to be very environmentally unfriendly. it would supply as much water, if not more water, than the Delta Convergence Project, which is a project up north around Sacramento, and where they'd have to build a whole new reservoir and a tunnel, which has high environmental impact. So California, which is struggling for water, we could build this desalination plant, but they're not going to do that if you're not going to keep it open. And Salud and the Democrats like to talk about switching over to hydrogen for powering. Well, it turns out if you put a hydrogen plant there, you could produce hydrogen at a 50% less cost and of greater production than windmills make. So Diablo Canyon is a lot more than energy. It is not only going to save land, it could provide water, which we need, and it can provide hydrogen. And as I said, it's not a zero-sum game sometimes. Sometimes you have to make a trade-off, which, we need water. Well, okay, maybe a few fish die, but we need water. You want hydrogen power, it's got to come from somewhere. I use the analogy this way. If tomorrow, we know blood can carry diseases, we know you can have transfusion reaction. If I tomorrow said, you know what, no more blood next year, just like when Newsom said, no more electric cars, no more gas cars after this time, no more blood after next year. But if I don't put in all the steps, or I don't have all the steps and I haven't figured it all out, great, I'm going to start doing surgery next year, and if you need blood, you're going to die.
Well,
and these guys do this.
If you act precipitously, you don't see the problems that may arise.
No. But they aren't looking, as I said, they're looking at Diablo Canyon to try to make some group happy so that they get elected, rather than saying, you know what? Diablo Canyon can produce electricity, it can save land, it can make water, and it can make hydrogen.
We need to move to item 6, and that's the mismanagement of COVID.
Yeah, I mean, as a doctor, I knew 2 years ago that they were lying when they said if you have a vaccine and a mask, you won't get COVID. Why? The vaccine gives you internal immunity, it protects your internal organs, but COVID comes in through your mucosa, through the lining of your nose, the lining in your mouth, the lining in your breathing tubes. And you don't have any immunity from this. So it was obvious that people were going to still get COVID, but they used the breakthrough infections, which were not even mostly breakthrough infections, to say we need to keep locking down, we need to keep businesses closed. And the people who say, well, you can get it 2 or 3 times because antibody levels go down, once again, that's known. Antibody levels always go down, but it's going to be a milder infection. I wrote an editorial on this that was in the Santa Barbara News Press about a month ago that explained all of this. The problem is we mismanaged COVID. We kept things locked down when we knew this was happening. Interesting, to me, one of the more interesting things is there's a guy named Dr. Henderson, Donald, I think Henderson, out of the University of Pittsburgh. He was the person who led the worldwide effort to eradicate smallpox. A smart guy, worked with viruses a lot. In 2006, he and his team looked at what should we do if a virus as bad as the 1918 Spanish flu came around. Should we lock down? Should we wear masks? Should we close businesses? They looked at all these questions. Should we look at computer models? In every case, they said, no, computer models will be wrong. And in every case, they said, keep society as normal as possible, because disrupting it will cause a lot of unintended consequences and not work. That was the CDC's position up until COVID. And as soon as COVID hit, they threw the science of Dr. Henderson, which they had agreed with, out the door and did these things. And even as his results started to show that they were wrong, that the computer models didn't work and all these things were happening, and when other countries were showing that this was not a good idea, we kept doing it. So when they said they followed the science, no, they didn't. They didn't follow medical science as I know it, and they didn't even follow the virologist who they all thought, who had modeled this before it even happened. So it's been mismanaged so bad, and we already went over how it's hurt businesses and our kids. And I think we need to stop government. Fauci's already talking about, well, if we have another strain, another variant, maybe we'd have to lock down again. You'd think he would learn after this period of time.
He needs to be locked up.
Yeah, we gotta. I've said this to you. if you told you need surgery, what's the first thing you do? Probably get a second opinion. Well, we weren't allowed to get second opinions with him, and that's not how medicine works.
No, in fact, they blew the second opinions that were very good off of Twitter, off of emails, off.
And yet that's how medicine works. We all go to a second opinion. Doctor, it's not infallible. There's often many ways to treat a disease. We got to stop government from doing that.
Fentanyl, human trafficking, violence, it's coming across our southern border. How do we answer that?
Over 2 million immigrants have come across the southern border in the last 18 months. That's higher or more than the population of 25 of our states. It's a huge burden on housing, huge burden on law enforcement, huge burden on our society. And this is not without consequences. And as you said, we're letting fentanyl, the number one killer of people 18 to 45, over 100,000 dying. It's just coming in across the southern border. There's other consequences than just people. The cartels have gone, I don't know, I can't remember, but they've gone from making like less than $1 billion a year to billions and billions a year. So we're funding organizations that are now trying to take over Mexico. The consequences of these actions are unbelievable.
And they really emanate from our greatest enemy and our future enemy, China, right?
And the fentanyl comes from China. But here's the thing about it. And, I think this immigration problem can be solved by doing two things. One, secure the border. And second, separate citizenship from the right to work. Because we need temporary and some workers here. We do. And employers need them. So if we had a system that said, if you came here illegally, you don't get citizenship. You can't jump the line. But we're going to let you, if you've been living here law-abiding, we're going to give you a card, let you work, let you stay, because you've been here 10 years and you've been law-abiding. And then also with the newer work, with the other workers, we have a temporary program. This would mean that people wouldn't be deported. They could work here safely. We'd help the employers, we'd help the employees, and they could come and go back and not have to fear going home or coming back. The problem is the Democrats aren't interested in the employers. They're not interested in helping them with the workers they need. They're not interested in helping the immigrants. They're only interested in getting votes. So all they keep talking about is citizenship, citizenship, citizenship. They're not interested in helping these immigrants. They're not interested in solving the problem. They're interested in votes. This problem is solvable if they would just do the right thing.
And your last item, one that we all love, but there's a question of how we can get it done.
I think my last item is term limits, because one of the things I've noticed as I've been running is career politicians, as I said, they don't care about you. They care about their party. They care about their next assignment. They're not from the real world. They have bills with consequences you could never do in real life, but they do it all the time, and they try to buy your vote. And I've become very cynical of what they do. As I've always said to people, if you had a problem with your business or your hospital, would you bring a politician in to fix it? Everybody says no. I said, well, then why do you let them run your government? Why don't we start electing people who actually come from the real world, actually have expertise outside of government and know how to actually solve problems, which is what I've done all my life, solve problems. How could we get that through? Well, first of all, if I got elected, you can use a bully pulpit. In other words, you now have a bigger voice, more than just coming back as a congressman and saying, here, I'm bringing a new library. We can look for change. And you can do a constitutional convention if you really needed to, and go around Congress to do this. I think the big thing is to get where you have a bully pulpit, because once you get people on your side, a lot things, politicians are pretty fast to change once they see the winds blowing.
I'd like to twist it a bit.
Go.
You're not a bully, but you sure handle a pulpit well.
Well, I think but I said that's part of the point. Is people have asked me how would you deal with this? I'd say this and other issues. I say I'd get up and I'd communicate, because people change their mind.
Now that you do well.
People often change their mind when they understand the issue.
We're run out of time in the next minute. You want people to help you.
Yeah, the biggest problem I have is getting my message out, and that's not something I'm good at as a pediatric heart surgeon, but please go to my website, www.drbradallen.com. That's www.drbradellen.com. I don't care if it's $5. If you can give me some money that helps get me on the air, that helps get these points out, it helps me promote the contract, it helps me start to defeat some of these professional politicians.
Dr. Allen, thank you.
Thank you.
I always say my best to your wife.
Oh, you're anytime.
I knew how. Got to keep the ladies happy.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.